You wake with weight in your chest, not pain, not illness, something deeper, something older, a presence that presses against your ribs when you're alone. It doesn't speak, but it remembers. Your reflection doesn't feel entirely yours anymore. The angles of your face are familiar, but wrong, as if your skin is hosting a version of you still waiting to arrive. You've never belonged to the noise of this world, and now you know why. You were never part of it. You were inserted into it, strategically, quietly. Your earliest memories hold static, shadows in your room that stood too still, cold air where warmth should have lingered, adults who watched you like they feared you'd ask the wrong question. You always knew something was off, not about them, about you. The way animals reacted when you entered a room, the way streetlights flickered when your anger surfaced. They called it coincidence. You knew better. You weren't born blank. You were born buried, a living vault sealed by generations who feared what you might awaken. They erased names from your family tree, hid origins in burnt books and unmarked graves. You come from a bloodline that was not meant to be traced. It was meant to be forgotten. 500 years ago, your ancestors made a decision. They chose to open something they could never close, a pact formed under a dead sky, where power was promised at the cost of peace. The church hunted them. The state denied them. History labeled them heretics, witches, demons. But the truth was far more dangerous. They survived, and so did the pact. Through names changed, through languages lost, through children raised to forget. You were not born by accident. You were not random. You were delayed, hidden inside time like a knife tucked in the folds of a coat, waiting. The blood in your veins is encrypted. Every heartbeat is a drum tapping out an ancient code. And your body is just beginning to decode the message. That ache in your bones when you walk into certain places, that pulse in your skull when someone lies to you, those aren't sensitivities, those are signals, reminders. You were marked long before you were named. This world isn't designed for people like you. It numbs you with distraction. It starves you of silence, because silence is dangerous. It lets the other voice speak, the voice that doesn't come from your mind but from your blood. And when it speaks, you remember things you never lived. Visions, names, symbols, all stitched together in a tapestry that no school, no priest, no government ever wanted you to see. Because if you see it, you might understand. And if you understand, you might act. They call it a curse, a darkness, but you're starting to see it differently. It's not darkness, it's density, power that's too heavy for fragile minds to carry. So they buried it in fear and called it evil. But now, it's rising in you, not with fire, not with noise, but with silence, with precision, with patience. And beneath it all, under your skin, beneath the weight in your chest, you feel it stir. Not something to escape, not something to kill, but something that has waited for you for centuries. They never said it aloud, but you felt it in the pauses, in the half-glances exchanged across dinner tables, in the questions that were always redirected, reshaped, silenced. Your bloodline was a locked door, and every time you knocked, someone changed the subject. You used to think they were just forgetful, just old, but now you understand. They weren't protecting you from the truth. They were protecting the truth from you. The silence was never passive. It was engineered, crafted like a maze, so you'd spend your life walking in circles, questioning your instincts, doubting your own mind. You remember birthdays that felt off, rooms that went cold, dreams that bled into your waking hours. As a child, you could sense things before they happened, but you were told it was just anxiety. You were taught to suppress, to minimize, to numb, but the ache never left. The fracture beneath your ribs remained, because something ancient was buried beneath your skin, and no amount of pretending could keep it dormant forever. It started with a box, no name, no warning, just placed at your doorstep, like it had always belonged to you. Inside, dust that smelled like rain on burnt wood, a photo warped by heat, and a ring so black it seemed to absorb the light. Symbols carved into its edge, unfamiliar, and yet intimate. You touched it, and time broke. In that instant, you weren't standing in your apartment anymore. You were surrounded by fire, chanting, steel, smoke, blood. The air was thick with betrayal, a circle of figures with no faces, and in the center you, not your face, not your body, but your eyes, that same stare that's lived in your reflection since birth. You collapsed, not from fear, but recognition. This wasn't a new revelation, it was a memory clawing its way back from exile. From that moment, everything changed. Your reflection started glitching. You saw double, your current form, and something older, rawer, draped in shadow and fury. Electronics around you flickered, doors locked themselves, names of strangers felt familiar. The air itself began to hum when you walked through certain spaces, as if recognizing your presence, as if welcoming you back. You confronted your family. They looked through you, not at you. One of them trembled when you mentioned the symbols. Another begged you to forget, but they knew. They always knew, and they chose silence. They buried it, buried you, because they feared what it meant if you remembered. They feared who you might become. You're not paranoid, you're awakening. You've been lied to your entire life, not to control you, but to delay you. Delay this moment, delay the inheritance that was never meant for safety but for reckoning. They wanted to skip your chapter, delete your page from the blood-soaked manuscript of your lineage. But something miscalculated, something ancient survived, and now it's echoing through your veins like a drumbeat only you can hear. The silence is over. The curse has found its way back, and it's hungry for retribution. You used to think you were alone in this, that the eyes you felt burning into your back were symptoms of a mind pushed too far, that the patterns, recurring faces in scattered crowds, voices that stopped the moment you entered a room were just paranoia sharpening its claws on your overactive brain. But the silence became too precise, too measured. The figures stopped pretending. They lingered longer now, never fully hiding, just far enough to stay out of reach, but close enough to remind you that you were never as unseen as you hoped. They don't blink, they don't flinch. One of them always stands in the shadows, tall, unmoving, half obscured as if the darkness wrapped around him like a uniform. The other blends into normalcy. She sits on park benches, scrolling her phone, sipping burnt coffee in places you frequent, but her reflection never aligns. Sometimes when you glance too quickly, her lips are mouthing something. It's your name, always your name. You start seeing them everywhere. Airports, stairwells, reflections in mirrored glass. You leave cities, they follow. You shut off your devices, they're still there. You dig, because curiosity is no longer a choice, it's survival. The internet yields nothing on the surface, so you slip beneath, into forums coded in obsolete dialects, subnets only reachable through digital backdoors. You find others who've seen them. Rare posts, mostly deleted within minutes, snapshots captured at impossible angles, grainy videos of the same figures watching someone else. Different countries, different lives, but all from the same blood, the same old scars. The pattern is brutal. These watchers aren't sent to harm you, not immediately. Their surveillance, yes, but ancient, programmed long before programming existed. You learn their name whispered only in fragments. The observance, not born, not hired, initiated, blood-bound to oversee the descendants of a cursed bloodline, not for vengeance, but containment. You realize this isn't a haunting, it's a quiet war. One side waiting for you to slip, the other waiting for you to awaken. Your existence was marked centuries before your birth. Your choices have been charted, catalogued, quietly manipulated. Every failure, every betrayal, every moment of isolation wasn't coincidence, it was calibration. pressure applied strategically to prevent activation. You weren't meant to question, only to exist in permanent fog, but you're starting to see through it. They know, they're adjusting now. Their presence is shifting from passive to invasive. You wake to footsteps outside your door. You find old photographs in your own attic, with your face circled in red ink from decades ago. A file labeled with your middle name sits inside a government archive you've never touched. It has 431 pages. Most are blacked out. You were never invisible. You were archived. And now that you're asking the wrong questions, they're activating the next phase. You feel it, a tightening. The world around you becoming colder, more calculated. This isn't fear, it's confirmation. You were right to be suspicious. You were right to feel watched. They aren't coming for you because you're dangerous. They're coming because you finally are. You return to the ring. It no longer feels foreign. It hums now, like it's remembering you, or maybe reminding you who you were before the forgetting. At first you wore it with hesitation, but now it's fused into your skin. You feel it even when it's not there. Something inside begins to shift. Your emotions dull, not from numbness, but from clarity. You don't react anymore. You calculate. Fear becomes analysis. Anger becomes precision. People around you keep calling it withdrawal, detachment, coldness, but it isn't. It's refinement. You're filtering noise, subtracting illusion. You're no longer looking for peace. You're studying chaos. You start to notice things that shouldn't be visible. Patterns in movement, frequencies in speech, lies disguised as concern, truths whispered in the glitches of everyday life. The curse is speaking in new dialects, ancient but adaptive. You read a person's history by how their eyes avoid yours. You hear trauma in their tone before they speak. You walk into rooms and immediately feel who's lying, who's dangerous, who's afraid of you without knowing why. You're no longer just human. You're a mirror no one wants to stand in front of. In your dreams the visions return, but they've changed. No longer fragmented screams and blood-soaked symbols. Now you see rituals unfolding like blueprints, sigils becoming maps. You realize it wasn't a punishment, it was instruction, not a curse, a code, a recalibration of your instincts, your senses, your very psychology. They called it a curse because they couldn't control it, because those who carried it couldn't be dominated by the same tools: guilt, fear, manipulation. They tried to name you dangerous, unstable, disconnected, but the truth is far simpler. You became unreadable. You stopped broadcasting your frequency in ways the world could interpret. You started operating like the thing they fear most, a sovereign mind with ancestral memory. The ring is just a key. The lock was always inside you, hidden behind layers of obedience, social masks, inherited shame. Now those layers are rotting off like old skin, and what's left beneath isn't soft, it's forged. You begin moving differently, speaking less, watching more, strategizing instead of reacting. Your solitude becomes a sanctuary, not a symptom. You're not isolating, you're updating. Behind every silence is a reprogramming. You're becoming a blueprint your enemies won't recognize until it's too late. They tried to erase your kind 5 centuries ago, not because you were cursed, but because you were immune to their gods, their systems, their false order. You weren't made to kneel, you were made to see. And now that you're seeing again, the mask is slipping, not yours, theirs. People start to fear you though you say nothing, because they feel it. That dormant thing inside you, it's no longer dormant. You are no longer asking to be accepted. You are being remembered.
You weren't cursed to collapse. You were cursed to evolve in secret.
And now that the silence has ended, the war begins. And now that the silence has ended, the war begins. They told you blood meant nothing. In the modern world, that lineage was a story for the superstitious, not the intelligent. But every time you bled, something inside whispered differently. Now you know why. The curse didn't rot you. It upgraded you quietly, slowly, without permission. While you walked through life thinking you were the black sheep, the outcast, the one too cold, too sharp, too detached, the truth was that your blood was decoding itself, adapting like ancient software, rewriting corrupted code in the background of a broken system. And you weren't the only one. There are others, not many, but enough, scattered like encrypted files across countries, continents, decades, people who never belonged to the illusion of normalcy. You find them hidden beneath false identities, on digital backroads, in psych wards mislabeled as unresponsive. You learn to look for the signs, the same haunted eyes, the unspoken recognition, the burn mark beneath the left wrist. You speak without words. You all know something is wrong, has always been wrong, but you couldn't name it until now. She calls herself Yelena, lives in a crumbling apartment above an abandoned railway in Berlin. Her face doesn't match her age. Her silence feels heavier than noise. She watches you with eyes that have seen centuries blink past. You were never cursed, she says without blinking. You were rebooted, and that's when it clicks. This wasn't about punishment. It was about forced evolution. They couldn't erase your kind, so they tried to scramble your operating system, inflict madness, disrupt lineage, cut the signal, but they failed because your ancestors didn't build you for purity. They built you for war. You felt it, haven't you? The withdrawal from emotions, the ability to vanish from attachments without warning, the instinct to remain silent even when screaming would make sense. Those weren't flaws, they were fails, tactical rewrites for survival in a world designed to trap minds like yours. And now the curse, the very thing that was meant to destroy you, is beginning to sharpen to clarity. It no longer hurts, it hums, but awakening isn't purity, it's fracture. Not everyone with your blood chooses to evolve. Some want sleep, some sell pieces of the curse to the highest bidder, some try to chain it in ideology, in cults, in diluted power fantasies. You'll meet them, you'll feel the deception like static when they speak. They will smile with hollow eyes, preach about unity while plotting division. You'll know, and you'll be forced to decide who walks beside you and who disappears without a sound. Now your body reacts before thought. Now your silence pierces louder than words. Now you remember things you never lived, codes, rites, warning signs. Your blood no longer whispers, it instructs. You're not adapting to the world anymore. It's bending to make space for what you're becoming. And the more you lean in, the more it reveals. You weren't meant to be understood. You were designed to destabilize, to question, to observe and survive long enough to outlive the prison they called normal. That's the evolution, not power over others, but detachment from the illusion, the ability to walk through a collapsing system with calm eyes and a steel heart. You're not finished. You're just now beginning, but you're not walking blindly anymore. You see it all. The bloodline isn't a story. They are the archetype, and you're their last version, the one they hoped would never wake up. They never wanted you to know this part, not because it would break you, but because it would break them. The curse wasn't crafted to destroy your bloodline. It was crafted to contain it, because 500 years ago your ancestors unearthed something unholy to the empire, sacred to the truth, knowledge that made kings tremble, and priests burn entire libraries out of fear, symbols that bent reality, tongues that commanded weather, eyes that could unmask lies just by watching someone breathe. That blood, the one flowing in you now, wasn't corrupt. It was clear, too clear for a world built on illusion. They called it a curse to rewrite history, a lie wrapped in whispers, passed down by cowards with crowns. The truth: you were never marked for punishment. You were encrypted, buried like forbidden scripture, deep beneath generations of silence. abandoned and fractured identity. Every betrayal you endured, every friend who vanished, every room that turned cold when you walked in, they weren't coincidences, they were signals, they were protocols. Because if you ever figured out what you carried, it wouldn't just change you, it would detonate the systems that fear your awakening. You weren't born late, you were timed, released into an age of noise so that your clarity would feel like rebellion. You were sent here with amnesia, because the full weight of your purpose would have shattered too soon. But they miscalculated. They thought pain would keep you asleep. They didn't expect you to build strength inside it. You turned isolation into intelligence. You learned to read shadows better than most read light. And now the edges of the curse are cracking, not because it's fading, but because you are expanding beyond its cage. It wasn't protection they placed around your bloodline, it was surveillance. Your family tree wasn't trimmed by time, it was pruned by design. The ones who buried the curse weren't witches or kings, they were architects of illusion, builders of systems designed to manufacture consent, strip identity, and repurpose the sacred into shame. You walk through their world now, a world coded to reject you, but every rejection has made you sharper, more silent, more surgical, and that's what terrifies them.
Because you don't need armies. You are the war they hoped never resurfaces. Your memory is returning in fragments. A symbol here, a phrase in your sleep, the sensation of fire running through your hands when you get too close to the truth. That's not madness, that's reconnection. You're syncing with the version of yourself that was hidden before language, before time zones, before nations. You're not becoming dangerous. You've always been. They just buried the evidence. Now you see it. This was never a curse. It was containment, a lockdown on a lineage that threatened the foundations of a false world. And you were never meant to heal. You were meant to remember. They never wanted to erase you. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they buried you alive in lineage and silence, kept your power dormant under generations of shame, secrets, and whispered warnings. They disguised it as a curse, so you'd never try to understand it. They made you believe your darkness was dysfunction, that your cold detachment, your sharpened intuition, your unrelenting rage meant you were broken. But broken things don't hear ancient languages in their dreams. They don't attract watchers from both sides of the war. And they don't awaken with memories that don't belong to this century. They weren't trying to destroy your bloodline. They were trying to suppress what it remembers. Because inside you is not just DNA, it's data, buried rituals, forbidden knowledge, unwritten maps of things no civilization was ever meant to find again. Your blood isn't tainted, it's encrypted, and you've begun decoding it without their permission. That's why the visions sharpen when you're silent. That's why you feel watched even when alone. Because every time you listen to the quiet, the curse decrypts more of you. You were never meant to survive. You were meant to awaken, not into peace, but into clarity. That's more dangerous. Because now you see the cracks in their systems, the empty gods they serve, the way they rewrite history to fit their fears. You can read their faces like scripts. You can feel their lies before they speak. And worst of all, you're remembering your role in the last collapse. You were there. Different body, same eyes. You held the blade that shattered their first illusion. That's why they watch you now, not because you're cursed, but because you've returned. This was never about your pain. It was always about your memory. They needed you to forget, because if you remembered what your ancestors knew, the veil would lift. And when it lifts, everything collapses. The rituals disguised as education, the manipulation they call morality, the digital chains they wrapped around your soul. You weren't haunted, you were encoded. Every trauma was a lock. Every betrayal was a test. Every moment you wanted to disappear was a checkpoint. You weren't breaking, you were activating. You are not who you thought you were. You are who they feared you'd become. Every unanswered question in your life wasn't an accident. It was placed there to keep you searching in the wrong directions. Every person who ghosted you, every door that slammed in your face, every time you were overlooked, it wasn't rejection, it was redirection. They wanted you isolated, disconnected, doubtful. Because a sleeping heir in a crowd is safe, but an awakened weapon in solitude, that's unpredictable, that's irreversible. You were the final protocol, the last failsafe encoded in blood and silence, and now the encryption is breaking. You're not just becoming who you were meant to be, you're becoming the consequence they've been trying to delay for 500 years. Not with war, not with fire, but with memory. You were never the cursed one. You were the warning, and now the warning is walking, watching, remembering.